Our second panel, as I alluded to, will be concern the Indian subcontinent and its struggle with jihadi groups and radical Islamist ideology. All of our panels have roots in the region and have extensive knowledge of their topics. For myself, I will. I have been to the region twice last year, including visiting the Kashmir region, and so it's something that is near and dear to my heart. And we will be joined by three different panelists. Let me briefly introduce them. One is, and excuse me if I'm pronouncing this incorrectly, Richa Gautam is an expert in human rights, civil rights, and minority rights. She's the executive director of CARES Global, a human rights organization that works with the rehabilitation of refugees. And since 2021, her and her team have engaged UNHRC, the European Parliament, and to highlight the plight of religious minorities in Pakistan and Bangladesh. Nice to meet you. Thanks for coming. Second, Asra Nomani. She is a former Wall Street Journal reporter and a friend and colleague of Daniel Pearl, who, of course, was murdered by Pakistani terrorists February 1st of 2002. She is the author of Woke Army and the countless articles on the subject of radical Islam, jihadism, and reform in the Islamic world. Finally, we have Abhinav Pandya. He is the founder, director, and CEO of the USANIS Foundation. The USANIS Foundation is an Indian-based security and foreign policy think tank. He has written extensively about the conflict in Kashmir and is the author of several books, including one on terror finance in Kashmir, and many other topics on the Indian subcontinent, the Middle East, and the wider geopolitics of jihadism, radical Islam, and regional politics in the largest sense. So thank you to all of you for joining us. Abhinav, are you there you are. Okay, there you are. Sorry, just want to make sure you were there. Let us start with you. Really appreciate you coming. If you want to give just a brief introduction to your background and your topics, go for it. Hello, you're muted, Abhinav. Muted.
Yes, sure.
There you
go. Thank you very much, Cliff, for inviting me. It's always a pleasure and an honor talking at the platforms which are hosted by you. So in terms of background, I've mostly worked in Kashmir. Previously, I was working in the capacity of informal capacity of advisor to the governor. Besides that, I've also worked as a researcher at the grassroots level in Kashmir. So I've mostly dealt with the terrorist organizations, Islamist organizations, their funding chapters and all. And apart from that, I've also worked on the radical Islamist organizations working in the Indian hinterland, that is outside Kashmir, mostly in Kerala and all. So in my opening remarks, I must say that, well, definitely terrorist actors are there, and in Kashmir we have a trinity. I call it a sinister trinity of terrorist organizations, that is Lashkar, HM, and Jaish-e-Mohammed. They are supported by Pakistan, and in the mainland India we have organizations like Indian Mujahideen. Once again, they have deep ties with the Pakistani deep state and all. But bigger than that, the real threat which is coming up in India lately is the radicalization of the Muslims at the grassroots level. And the expansion of the Islamist organizations like Jamaat-e-Islami, Popular Front of India. So these groups like Jamaat-e-Islami and Popular Front of India, they work as legal entities, as charities, and they are not clandestine entities. And these groups have strong penetration in the government, administration, political setup, media, academia, everywhere. So they are like entities hiding in the plain sight. And if one explores their role at the deeper level, then you'll find that they are the organizations which are essentially facilitating the growth and expansion of the terror groups. Like recently, PFI was banned in India, and we found that PFI has made huge inroads in the colleges, academia, and political groups. They were involved in killing and murders. They were involved in recruiting people for the ISIS. Likewise, in Kashmir, Jamaat-e-Islami is an organization which is an intellectual arm of Hizbul Mujahideen, and they play a very crucial role in radicalizing people at the grassroots level. It is said that in most of the assassinations and the killings, Jamaat has a say in Jammu and Kashmir. That's why it was banned. They play a crucial role in terror funding also. And now India is at a stage which is even a step ahead of these Islamist organizations. Now at the grassroots level, the common people, the Muslims, they are getting deeply connected to the global Islamist movements. And I must say, at this stage, India is sitting on a ticking time bomb. When people say that Pakistan and China are India's enemies, well, I don't disagree with them, but I think that India's primary and the most crucial security threat right now is the internal security threat, and that comes from the radicalization of the Muslims. In any random city of India, if you go, things can flare up into a massive communal riot in seconds. Yesterday only, there was a place in UP, which in Ghaziabad, 10,000, more than 10,000 Muslims, they assembled outside a famous temple called Dasna Temple, and they were demanding very severe punishment, including capital punishment for a Hindu monk. He had said something against Prophet. Now it's fine. Well, I mean, definitely, morally speaking, you can always say that whether one should not speak against anyone's prophets or religion. But then at a legal level, India is a democratic country, it's a secular country. You cannot have Sharia dictated laws in this country. But unfortunately, the radicalization of the Muslims at the grassroots level has made blasphemy an unofficial law in India. The moment in the future, if the current government fades out, or if there is any change, and if the next political establishment comes with the strong support of Muslims, I expect a major, shift in the legal structure of the country, which would be totally to the appeasement of the Islamic radicals. Like we have this board called Waqf Board, which has almost captured a major amount of countries' properties, including some of the crucial national security assets. So that's a big problem. And I must say that if there is any external threat for India in the future, let's say from Pakistan or from China, the locally radicalized Muslims working at the behest of Pakistan, or people, actors sitting now in Bangladesh also, they can create havoc, wreak complete havoc and destruction across the Indian subcontinent. And in these communal riots, thousands of people can die. It can lead to a situation of a major civil revolt and internal civil war kind of a situation. Unfortunately, after the regime change in Bangladesh, it has emerged as a hotbed of Islamist radical groups. And in this entire coup, which was staged in Bangladesh, this organization called Jamaat-e Islami and Islamic Chhatra Shibir was involved. And some of these people, like Mr. Muhammad Yunus, who comes out as a Nobel Prize winner and very close to the American establishment, but he's very, he is found, he doesn't say enough on the atrocities meted out to the Hindu minority. And it seems that, the Western deep state played a crucial role in the regime change in Bangladesh, but I can, from the kind of reports which I'm getting every day, Bangladesh is going to come up as a major, I would say, nodal point and epicenter of terrorism in South Asia now. So India will have a three-front external problem: Pakistan, China, Bangladesh, and a massive internal problem. And in the near future, in the next, let's say 3 to 4 years, from my reading, based on my strategic forecast, I think, and I have apprehensions that India will be subject to massive communal riots and bloodshed violence, communal violence across the country.
Let's real quick here. That's a great overview of what's going on in the wider Indian subcontinent. Let me ask you, since I know you specialize in Kashmir. About 5 years ago, the Indian government changed the legal status of Kashmir and immediately went to work improving the security situation vis-a-vis terrorist groups and insurgents. There has been a significant downturn of terrorist activity, but my understanding is that has started to tick back up. Do you want to give a lay of the land in Kashmir?
Can you repeat the last part? Sorry, there was some disturbance
A
in the
lay of the
voice.
land. You want to give a lay of the land in the Kashmir region?
Okay. Yes. So I must say that it was a great step which government of India executed in 2019. It was kind of a strategic necessity because Kashmir was almost on the verge of going towards the Syria, because after the Arab Spring, Kashmiri, not just the militant organizations, but even the common populace was coming under the strong influence of the global Islamist movements. But yes, as far as taking that step was concerned, government did a great job and they managed the situation brilliantly. After that, there was no casualty, nothing doing. But then that was not enough. After the abrogation of Article 370, we needed at least a 20-year roadmap to completely eliminate the sentiments and ideas of militancy, Islamic extremism, and separatism. Because this generation, the current generation of Kashmiri Muslims, is born and brought up on the narrative of Islamic extremism, victimhood for the last more than 2 to 3 decades. And they have these feelings ingrained in their mind. So you needed a 20-year roadmap. But unfortunately, it seems that the government in India at a higher level, policy making is very weak, and they don't seem to have a nuanced understanding of the dynamics of the Islamic extremism and militancy in Kashmir. And they went for short-term little things like organizing elections in Kashmir. So yes, stone pelting has come down, but you can see that these days militancy terrorist attacks are on the rise, and Pakistan has innovated in terms of terror attacks. They are sending highly trained terrorists who are basically Afghan returned terrorists. They are using American weapons which were left by the NATO forces in Afghanistan. They are also trained by the Sadat forces, which are close to the Turkish establishment, and they have like better communication equipment. So there's a huge concentration of foreign terrorists in Kashmir. At this stage, I guess the priority for the government of India should have been, to explore a strong roadmap. But I think that they were more under the pressure of the bureaucratic system in India, and they wanted to prove themselves in front of the Western institutions, which were always raising the idea of democracy in danger and the issues of human rights in Kashmir. Which, I mean, it seems, see, in this situation, basically, if anyone's rights are in threat, then it's the Hindu minorities' rights. They are under the threat because it's already a Muslim majority state, and they are very strictly opposing the resettlement of Kashmiri Pandits, who are the original inhabitants of that place. Now, if that is the mindset which is prevailing among the society, and people have strong liking and appreciation for organizations like ISIS, Al Qaeda, in that case, the government of India should have gone for a much better roadmap, a much better planning, and instead of going for elections. So now, with these elections, it seems that the old, separatists and also the anti-India and Islamic extremist elements from Jamaat-e-Islami are in a way back into the mainstream, and the situation is likely to become much more difficult in the future. That's what I feel.
Let's go to Asra. Asra, first, I'm happy to have you give any kind of background on some of your thoughts on some of this stuff. Also, I'm curious as a journalist, Abhinav has given a very broad description of all the different networks that work in India. What role does the U.S. play in helping to fund these networks, and intentionally or unintentionally?
Excellent. Well, thank you for having me here, and I really appreciate the first panel and Abhinav's contribution already, and I look forward to next talks. I am speaking to you with my heart full because I am a daughter of India, grew up in the United States, and I consider it my farz, or my actually sacred duty, to try to speak right now to the truth as I have seen it in what I consider a cross-border indoctrination and ideological campaign. I think Abhinav is not understating it when he says that it is a ticking time bomb that is in India, and it is intentional. It is the result of 5 decades of a strategy by members of this network. And I know this very personally and very well because I was born in India, summer of 1965. I'm the daughter of the first generation of those freed from white supremacy, right? British colonial rule, all that which is supposed to embody injustice in this world. And so India stands at that threshold when I am born of a new era. And as most people know, it is an era of secular democracy, which is such an important value. And as a Muslim, I understood very clearly what that meant, because in my family, growing up then my first 4 years in Hyderabad, my dadi called herself a feminist, and she wore a bindi on her on her forehead. She navigated between the Hindu communities and the Muslim communities with comfort and friendship and neighborliness. And that is the Islam that my parents raised me with. So when I came to the United States in 1969, I was part of this new generation of Muslims that had come from across the far corners of the world. My father started the first Muslim Students Association at Rutgers University. And I bring you this moment, this touchstone, because almost 6 decades later, we are in a crisis. We are in a global crisis that is born from that decade. What my father knew was the birth of the Islamists, or those that believe in political Islam or Islam in governance. Because as a boy in Hyderabad, he remembers driving by the small signs for a man named Maulana Maududi. And Maulana Maududi, as many of you may know, was the father of this Islamism in the South Asia and in the subcontinent. He moved from India to Pakistan and brought his ideology there. Many of those followers of that Islamism came from Lebanon, from Palestinian territories, from Pakistan, from Jamaat Islami, from Muslim Brotherhood, all of the alphabet soup of organizations that believe in political Islam. And so over these 6 decades, what I have witnessed personally, and my journalism has also proven, is that they have established beachheads and footholds in the United States. I'm speaking to you all now from Virginia, which is my new home here, and they are just a few miles down the road with organizations that are funneling, just as you asked, this network into places like India. And so they are the nexus of both American leftists and now leftists in India and throughout the world with the Islamists. And I'm just going to show you a couple of examples just to illustrate for you how they work. I go to their conferences. The Islamic Society of North America is one of the byproducts of this network. And here is one of their messages. What is it? Kashmir action. So it sounds innocuous, perhaps, but what is it that they ultimately want is the propaganda of free Kashmir. And just as Abhinav was saying, there's no mention about the Hindus that have been the target of extremism by the Islamic militants funded by Pakistan intelligence. And what happens is they are using men like this guy, Yasser Qadi, who is an imam, educated in the United States, educated in Saudi Arabia, to send their indoctrination. In this flyer, he's just advertising digital halal investing. It seems innocuous again, but these are the foot soldiers of this new army. And who are others? This man, Mehdi Hassan, also of heritage from South Asia, worked for Al Jazeera. And what's his title? Defeating Hate. It's such a lovely concept. Who wouldn't agree with defeating hate? But what hate is it? It's their own ideological, caricature of Hindus, of India, of Israelis, of Jews. Like, their hate is not about their own hate because they preach a hate themselves. And what is this advertisement? Dar es Salaam Seminary. So the entire ideology of the most extremist interpretation of Islam from India, the Deobandi school of thought, has come now and made a foothold in places like upstate New York, California, with the very literal interpretation of Islam that denies women's rights, that practices anti-Semitism. And I want to just close with, the way that it matters today. Here it is. They want to save India from Indian fascists. And it's a lovely organization named Sound Vision based in Chicago. But today is October 7th, and we cannot ignore the fact that India has now become their new target after Israel. And October 7th marked that day when this hate network of these Islamists that are taking a foothold again in India unleashed its violence against Jews and Israelis. And in one of their flyers, they talked about the Zionist Islamophobe network, because It's all interconnected. They are going after the quote unquote Zionists. They are going after Indians. They are going after Hindus. They're going after anyone, including everybody who is speaking today, who dares to oppose their ideological interpretation of Islam. And so it is our farz, no matter what our religious interpretation, no matter what our spiritual philosophy, as a concept, it is our sacred duty to oppose this network because its ambitions are global. Its targets are personal. I lost my dear friend Danny Pearl to their hate. And to this day, I see that their hate continues to try to have free reign in our communities, from our campuses to the streets of Delhi. And I stand with all of you in trying to stand opposed to them.
Thank you very much. So much more to discuss, but let us give a little time to Risha here. Risha, you want to talk about sort of the effect that these kinds of ideologies have in Pakistan on Pakistani Hindus and other minorities in the Indian subcontinent, or minorities in those contexts, I should say, in Pakistan, Bangladesh, so on and so forth.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you so much, Clifford. I actually want to start off with just the date that we are, talking about, October 7th, for which and on which we are gathered here today, because, this date was the massacre that happened. I think it was termed as the 9/11 of Israel. And that was the day when we saw on social media something that we can never unsee, the assault on sexual violence on women, the assault on civilians. And I think it shocked the world. It shocked the world. And Dr. Elkayam Levy, who was heading the Civil Commission investigating the war crimes of October 7th, called out that this wasn't random. In at least 7 locations, the Israeli women and girls were sexually assaulted and mutilated with a similar pattern. And she called it rape as genocide, calling it an ISIS-style violence against the women. But for people like me and others who have been documenting and observing the religious persecution in Pakistan, they would know that this model has deeper roots and a longer history than ISIS. In Pakistan, actually, this sort of extremist fundamentalist groups that work there, clerics who guide or misguide, young children from their childhood, indoctrinating them, they are in charge of abducting, raping, and forcing religious conversion to Islam of all, literally pretty much all minor girls between the age of 9 to 18 are observed and in the rural and countryside of Pakistan, and they are converted. According to the European Parliament, 3 girls, mostly minors in the age group of 9 to 18, of non-Islamic faiths, every single day, 3 girls are converted to Islam and married after third or fourth wives of old men, and they live in sexual slavery forever. They cannot go back to their parents because it's apostasy to go back to Hindu parents again or Sikh parents. Some of them are sold to prostitution. And this is committed by men like Mia Mitu, who is infamous and notorious for this. He lives in Gotki, Sindh, and he openly claims he has his own army, and he claims that his life mission is to support these sort of conversions of girls to Islam. And the police and judiciary are all beholden to him. They fear for their own lives. So the system is subverted. Now, you would think that this is isolated to Pakistan or Bangladesh. We've seen when Bangladesh was formed in 1971, erstwhile East Pakistan, about 400,000 women were raped. 200 to 400,000 women were raped. There were rape camps. There were war babies that were born in those months, and the Pakistani army was involved in these rapes. And there was an informal order from General Yahya Khan saying that, change the gene pool of that country. 40% of the people there, the population was Hindu. And Today, I think it's about 7%. In Pakistan, Farhanaz Isfahani calls it a drip genocide because minorities have reduced from about a quarter of the population when Pakistan was formed in 1947 to about 3%. Okay, so this is the state of what we are seeing in Pakistan. And this is, I think the US has UN, they've all, I mean, there's been lots of reports going out, but we've basically turned a blind eye to these issues for a long time. But these issues are no longer localized. I think that is one important pattern that we are seeing. If you go into Europe, Europe is no longer the same place it used to be, say, 50 years ago. With the globalized, transmigration economy that we live in UK, there are groups of men who are called grooming gangs, and they prey on white girls. They identify vulnerable, maybe foster homes, and girls who are vulnerable, and they seduce them with gifts, they drug them, and they rape them, they scar them for life. And this crime has been going on for 40 years. Again, just like Pakistan, the system there was subverted. The police would not listen to the victims, the parents, and they would say the parents are equally responsible. And these crimes were not documented. If they were documented, they were not highlighted in media. If ever they came out in the media, these men were mostly Pakistani origin men, and this was not highlighted. They were called South Asian men and South Asian grooming gangs.
Um,
A million girls, I just want to say one more thing, a million girls were raped over these 40 years. So this is the kind of crime, that we are seeing around, and it's coming pretty much everywhere, wherever we're seeing large-scale transmigration.
This kind of bleeds into a topic that Asra touched on, but that I think also has relevance to things you touched on, is that the Pakistani government has clearly had a hand in supporting foreign networks to promote its ideology in America, in Europe. I mean, there have been people that have actually been jailed for being registered foreign agents of Pakistan, interfering in American politics. And Asra referred to some of the groups that are influenced by groups such as the Muslim Brotherhood, Jamaat-e-Islami, that have a presence in the US and Europe as well. How do you think that this affects sort of Western policies and views of the Indian subcontinent and what's going on there?
So did you address it to any one of us?
I was mostly referring to Risha, but both of you can
Oh.
answer, surely.
If I could, Risha, I'll just start off with a concept that I've just been introduced to that I think is so important in framing our understanding of this conversation, both in India and in Pakistan and the subcontinent and in the United States. There's this concept that terrorists, counterterrorism and counterintelligence people use in law enforcement, and it's called malign foreign influence. So the word malign means negative, right? Because foreign influence is it's also migration, it's immigrants, it's people contributing to a society. But malign foreign influence is particularly used to identify the tactics and strategies and funding by foreign governments into nations to try to have malign intention. And so, Clifford, you gave the perfect examples of, men who have been convicted in the United States of acting as agents of the Pakistan government. We know that the influence of Saudi Arabia first in the 1970s, 80s, 90s, 2000s in the United States, in Pakistan, in India has been massive. Now it's nations like Qatar and Turkey. And what is malign foreign influence doing? I mean, it is now, and of course, China. And so it is now putting a spotlight on politicians, right? Policymakers, others who are lobbied or influenced, media outlets also now that are included in that kind of foreign influence campaigns. And I want to just share with you guys that after my poor friend Danny's murder, I started this initiative called the Pearl Project. And in it, we do investigative reporting. First, we investigated Danny's murder and the network that was involved in his murder. And if you think about it, that ideology that has been used to fuel the Pakistani militant groups, it was funded and directed by Saudi Arabia back to the days of Zia al-Haq. You know, that was malign foreign influence in our subcontinent. And now, to this day, what I did is I made a database, and in it examined 1,000 organizations that are active in this anti-Israel protest. And of those, about 1/3 of them self-identify as socialist, communist, Leninist, Marxist. And the people of South Asia know that influence of that ideology also on our communities. And they are the ones that have come together with the Islamists that are funded by Qatar, Saudi, princes, and Turkey and other entities. And so I want everybody to just have that concept in mind, because when we look at the impact and from that lens, I think we can really understand how to follow the money and follow the influence.
Risha, you have anything to add?
Yes, absolutely. So, so I think some of the facts that Asra mentioned about Zia-ul-Haq specifically, I think even Pakistan had a much more moderate lifestyle before the Zia-ul-Haq regime, completely introduced very stringent extremist Islamic laws in the framework of Pakistan. And that has spawned a lot of the current issues that we are facing, not just in Pakistan, but the way it's percolated across the world. I think US has used Pakistan, it's a garrison state. It was created as a geostrategic ally of the Western world. And during the Cold War, I think it had its role to play. During the Afghanistan war, it had a role to play. But I think today, there is a reason that everybody is talking about Pakistan and the issues because it has now started to become a global issue. And even though last 15 years, US has tried to put some sort of linkages to conditionalities to the sort of loans or the money that they give to Pakistan, but it's not implemented. I think the US can definitely do a better job in implementing that and highlighting the issues that Pakistan has and putting conditional clauses to giving them funds. Even European Parliament has called a call to action, but as far as I've seen, that there has not been enough done to hold them accountable. So I think those are some of the steps that we can take and the government should take.
All right. Let's see. One thing that we haven't touched on yet that is related to all this is the unfortunate resurgence of the Taliban in Afghanistan. We could discuss what I consider disastrous decision for the U.S. to leave Afghanistan while negotiating directly with the Taliban all day. But at the end of the day, we have to deal with the situation as it is now. There's considerable pressure to aid, give humanitarian support to the Afghan people. I'm curious, though, will this actually help the Afghan people? And also, how do you see sort of the Taliban's rise in the wider conversation of radicalism across the Indian subcontinent? Anybody who wants to take that?
Abhinav, do you want to start?
Sure, I can start. Definitely, the resurgence and revival of Taliban is a very, very bad news for the not just entire South Asia, but for the entire world. Now, first coming to the humanitarian assistance for the Afghani people, certainly there's no doubt that they need humanitarian assistance. Conditions are really bad. But then there is no guarantee that the money which is given as a humanitarian assistance, it doesn't get diverted to the terrorist purposes. There is absolutely no guarantee on that front, right? I mean, if there are mechanisms to ensure that that money is used for the humanitarian purposes and all, then it's fine. But in the present circumstances, in the present situation, I don't see any such mechanism really getting effective. Secondly, Taliban has become very crucial geopolitically now. Like, it has become very useful to actors like China and Russia. Recently, Russia unlisted Taliban as a terror group now, and China has its own dealings with Taliban. So Taliban is also important in this emerging world order and in the emerging ongoing conflict situation to certain geopolitical actors. So which is, which will definitely limit our actions to control and restrain Taliban. Now, third question, that how it will affect the overall the situation of Islamism. I think that definitely it's going to boost the morale of many actors, because when Taliban like came back in Afghanistan, a lot of Islamists in India, they were very happy and they were celebrating that if Taliban can do it in Afghanistan, why not we? In Kashmir, people were celebrating. Here, even some of very educated people, like there was this famous poet called Mr. Munawwar Rana. He's dead now. He was like advocating and supporting Pakistan on the screen, and he's known for writing poetry on Hindu-Muslim unity and all, but still he was supporting the Taliban's radical anti-female, anti-women policies and ideology. So, and then Taliban subscribes to the Deobandi ideology. So we must understand that Deobandism has a history of 150 odd years in the entire subcontinent. And Deobandi extremism is older than ISI, it is older than Pakistan, it has its own logic. And when it comes to Deobandi extremism, I place them even a notch higher than the Wahhabi extremism or even the Ahle Hadith, because for Saudis, it may be something like a geostrategic, instrument or something, and they are also changing now. Like they have, they are not anymore with this working with the same passion. But the Deobandi extremists, they are working at a much higher level, and Deobandis are spread across the Indian subcontinent, and definitely they have very strong roots. So with Taliban's resurgence, these guys will be very strongly emboldened. I would also briefly like to mention about my latest book. This is Inside the Terrifying World of Jaish-e-Mohammed. It's a Deobandi terrorist group. The book has been published by HarperCollins. So if anyone wants to know about the penetration of Deobandi networks in South Asia, they can, if they want, they can refer to this book. So that's going to be a big problem. And in general, I must say, in like at least in India or in Pakistan, the common people, they are getting strongly associated with the global Islamist movements. And Taliban is a very successful model that, people would want to replicate it.
Asra, do you want to?
Yeah, that is just wonderful. I'm looking forward to reading your book too, Abhinav, and I'm so glad you asked this question, because the Taliban captures for us the worst of Islamism. A terror state that suppresses the rights of minorities, women, secularists, atheists, anyone who differentiates from their strict interpretation. And Abhinav is completely correct. The roots of this ideology are before these alphabet soup of terror groups. I am proud that my ancestors fought the Deobandi ideology at the turn of the 20th century in Uttar Pradesh. My ancestor was the man by the name of Asra Nomani, who started a university then, and that was part of the whole Aligarh Muslim University effort of education, both with science and perhaps faith, but not extremism. And so our opposition also to that extremism is as long as that extremism has existed. And I want to just speak very clearly that India must rise to the highest values of secular governance in order to defeat this type of extremist ideology. The leaders of India must be a shining example for the world of what it has been, what my parents and I grew up in living in coexistence. And we cannot go down that path of opposition to each other because of religious identities or secular identities, because that sectarianism is exactly what killed my friend Danny. It is what makes these young Hindu girls, as Richa has pointed out, targets, because that interpretation says that they are illegal, and that they are prey, that these predators can then try to steal from their families. And so everything that we care about must be won in the subcontinent. And I just know that we can win it because our ancestry won. Like our ancestry defeated that extremism so that we exist today in this conversation. And I just know we can win it, but we have to be really clear about what that enemy is, and we stand in opposition to it with positive values.
So if I may just add a couple of points there, what happened in Afghanistan? I mean, it's not that they don't allow minorities to exist. Literally now there are no Hindus there. There are no Sikhs there. All of the gurudwaras, the temples have been destroyed pretty much. There may be one or two left here and there. So the diversity that we would, appreciate in a democracy is non-existent in Afghanistan. And the UN recognizes, I'm talking about the plight of women, which is horrible. If there are a minority religion, women from minority religion in those areas, they are treated as what Asra just said, Malign, which is like their prey, their war booty. And why is it war booty? Because even though that is not a conflict zone, like Pakistan is not recognized as a conflict zone, but there is a concept in Deobandi and other extremist Islamist thoughts that there is a Dar-ul-Islam and Dar-ul-Harb. Dar-ul-Harb is a place of war. And wherever there is no 100% Islam, that is the place where they're still allowed to do jihad, and they are supposed to conquer. And that is how women are not safe there. So UN needs to recognize that these are ground realities, United Nations, US, and other human rights organizations, that these are the ground realities that the minorities in Pakistan, in Afghanistan have faced. And that is why they cannot really coexist, because it's a place of conflict.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What's from the audience? One thing that I think you might be able to discuss that we haven't really gotten to yet is the role of women in some of these Muslim majority countries, or even women in India, the Muslim women. Many of them must or certainly feel unfairly treated by the most extreme versions of their faith that are mostly being propagated by men. Is there a way to encourage them to change their own societies?
Well, I was honored to travel to Tamil Nadu some years ago, and there I met a woman named Sharifa, and she was building the first women's mosque in India. And she was building it because the mosque is a men's club. It is unfortunately barred from entry for many women, and absolutely not, given equal rights at the pulpit and in the main hall. So what she found was exactly what happens, is that important issues of personal law, family law, child custody, alimony, important issues in a person's life were all being decided by the men, right? That's the patriarchy that we have decided in the 21st century cannot define our world. And we know that, the issues of sexism, misogyny, anti-women attitudes, it's pervasive around the world. Let's be, honest about that. And India as a whole has challenges, because we're a traditional patriarchal society, and there's so much that we have to do for equal rights. But the role of women is so critical, because when we practice an interpretation of Islam that I call Islamic feminism, which is just the idea that a woman is equal witness to a man, in her own rape, that a daughter gets equal inheritance to a brother. All of those ideas are the antithesis of extremist Islam. They are the antithesis of Deobandi Islam. So when you fight for women's rights, you fight against the extremist interpretation in Islam, and really in all faiths. Like, all faiths have tried to use religion to suppress half of our communities. And so I've been inspired. You know, I mentioned my dadi. She was a feminist. She made sure all of her daughters had higher education. She was believed in free movement. You know, these are all fundamental ideas that are denied to women in this strict interpretation of Islam. And so I hope that in all the communities that we have, we will uplift their voices and really support them, because sometimes we're alone in our own community, or people are afraid to speak up to support us. And so it's really critical to the future of our world that we have the voices of Islamic feminism and women in Islam, and the men who support us. My father self-declares as a feminist. He was with me every time I stood up for my rights. And I so appreciate, you know, the men in Islam who also stand with us with that interpretation of Islam. But it is critical, Clifford, you know, it's vital to seeing a better world for all of us.
Abhinav?
Yeah. So I have a point to add here. When we are talking about the social evil ill practices, social ills inflicting the conservative Islamic societies, I guess we have to remember the overarching influence which a religious ideology can have over a person's psyche. First point. Second point, some of these Islamists are very shrewd. They are very clever, so they know that some of these issues like the ill treatment of women, etc., can be the factors which can repel people from them. So they are basically presenting narratives which prove that their whole idea of Islamism is very modern, it's very empowering as far as females are concerned, and they also say that Islam offers the maximum amount of freedom and empowerment to females. For example, in Jammu and Kashmir, there was this Jamaat-e-Islami is working on these narratives. There was a professor, Saddam Padar, who was teaching sociology in the Kashmir University, and he became a militant because he was very inspired by the Maulana Maududi's ideology. And he said that some of the ideological thoughts offered by these Islamist schools like Muslim Brotherhood and Maulana Maududi, they are better alternatives to the modern version of democracy and secularism. So that is one front, which is the ideological front, where we need to be very cautious and we have to have a nuanced understanding. In Kashmir, you asked about the role of women. So I have accompanied security forces several times in encounters, and we found that before the militants are killed, they make a last call to their mothers. And by the way, Kashmir is a very women-dominated society. It's not a society where females are oppressed. Females have a very nice dressing sense, and they're very full of life, and they have a very strong role and presence in the society. More than males, I must say. Bengal and Kashmir are very different that way in India. So, but when militants make the last call to their mothers, initially they cry that, why did you join this and that? But after a while, they would say that, go, please, go kill all the, all these kafirs, and, you have to work for Islam, you have to work for the religion, you will be a martyr. And later on, what happens that when such a practice becomes a dominant, the stream in society, a dominant narrative, females, those mothers start getting a huge respect. So they also develop a stake in such narratives. And like recently in Karnataka in India, there was this whole hijab movement. There were young, educated girls. So government of India said that, well, you can wear hijab at your homes, that's perfectly fine. But at universities, in schools, hijab is not permitted, which is a very acceptable secular, instruction in any democratic society. But then the young, educated girls, they identified hijab with the question of their rights and their identities. So for them, these Islamists, they didn't project the issue of hijab as a religious issue. They projected the issue of hijab as the issue of minority rights. And then Al Qaeda stepped in. The fellow, I think the one who is dead now, Zawahiri, he gave a big statement, issued a big letter, and that kind of played a crucial role in mobilizing, consolidating, and radicalizing the common masses in India. So these are the points I think we should factor in.
I want
Richa,
to add,
go ahead.
yeah, a couple of points there. I agree. Like in the Kashmir region, the women, support the jihad. They want to support it. Basically, this is how the indoctrination works. It has worked like that in Bangladesh in 2024. Now that social media brings out every story, every visual, there were women who were tying the non-Muslim women and the Hindus specifically to polls and keeping them ready as prey for the men, to be raped. And this is the kind of stuff we have seen in Bangladesh. We've heard of stories in Kerala. I've seen the documentation for that as well, where the grooming gangs are in India are called, it's called the Love Jihad movement, and they have girls who help in the process of seducing these, their friends into converting into Islam. And then, of course, they are then used either as prostitutes or sometimes even as human bombs in Afghanistan. And, there have been cases like that. So it is very concerning that the women who would actually be upholders of, some of the non-extremist or more liberal thought or support women's rights, but no, there is in deep-seated indoctrination even among the women. So it's very concerning. That is very concerning, I think.
Well, let me ask one question that I think needs to be discussed, and some of you guys have alluded to it, is that there is, as you guys probably know, there is there's almost a cottage industry discussing, certainly in the US and I believe in Europe and other parts of the world even too, but discussing sort of inflating or conflating, that is, Israel and India as being some part of this wider movement that the jihadists are viciously opposed to. How does the sort of ideological narrative flow between those two? What effect does that have on the Indian subcontinent?
Well, I knew it firsthand because the men, that Abhinav has chronicled in his book, it's such a good book, Jaish-e-Mohammed, we cannot forget this alphabet soup of these organizations. The men who kidnapped Danny Pearl did not know first that Danny was Jewish, and they did not know that he was the grandson of Israel. But in the days that emerged after Danny's kidnapping on January 23rd, 2002, a journalist, unfortunately, in Pakistan, revealed in the newspaper that Danny was Jewish. And I'll never forget that morning because Marianne, Danny's wife, said, this is a death sentence, right? Because everything about the ideology that we've talked about is rooted in anti-Semitism too. It's rooted in a hate of Jews, and like it has in its roots, the misogyny against women. And then with the creation of the State of Israel in 1948, the State of Israel became a target for that hate. So when Danny was murdered, the man who takes credit for killing him with his blessed right hand, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the architect of the 9/11 attacks, he had Danny identify himself. And Danny said, my father is Jewish, my mother is Jewish, I am Jewish. And then he related the story of his grandfather who started a town called Bnei Brak. These are details that Danny did not need to share because Khalid Sheikh Mohammed did not know them. And in that city is a street named Haim Pearl Street for his grandfather. So this is 2002, right? And this is the inheritance of this ideological movement that we've talked about for the past hour. And now, flash forward 2 decades, and the Islamist movement has created twin enemies of Israel and India. Why India? Because India lays claim to one day soon, the largest population of Muslims. Like, we will outnumber Indonesia one day soon. That is a huge target audience for this extremist interpretation. And so in all of the language that I have seen over the past year, this alphabet soup of the inheritors of the Muslim Brotherhood and Lashkar-e-Taiba and Harkatul Mujahideen and all these organizations in the United States, Jamaat Islami, they are always saying that we must free the world from Palestine to Kashmir. Everything is from Israel to India. And they're sitting here in the United States, and they include the United States as part of their overthrow. But it is a parallel path now that they have in their propaganda and in their ideology, and I would argue in their foreign influence. And we cannot forget that China is a large player in this foreign influence campaign. And so China has a real incentive in trying to destabilize India and South Asia for its own purposes. And so having that broad view will help explain why it is that they are trying to free, Muslims from Palestine to Kashmir, because that is the swath of the world that they want to control also, and beyond, of course. But this is such a critical conversation, because if we just look at the United States or Israel, we're missing a huge battlefront.
Abhinav, you want to say something?
Yeah, I would just like to add something. You asked a very interesting question. Israel and India. So I would say similarities and dissimilarities. So to begin with, all the Islamist groups in India and the terrorist groups, particularly the Pakistan-sponsored terrorist groups, for them, the most crucial, like the most important enemies are India, Israel, and America. For Lashkar, for Jaish, everyone. The Islamist narrative in Pakistan has always thrived on the idea of Yahudo Hanud ki sazish. They would say Yahudi means Jews and Hanud means Hindu. So Jewish-Hindu alliance as the real evil alliance of the world. And in India, all the majority, the overwhelming majority of the Muslim population now, at least, they are deeply affected by what's happening in the Middle East, and they support Palestine. Recently, after the killing of Hassan Nasrallah, there were massive protests in Kashmir, in various other parts of the country. For example, the Shia community in India, they are very supportive of Iran. You go to Kashmir, Kargil is a place which is, for 6 months that is completely disconnected from rest of the India. But the entire city is is full of the billboards showing Khomeini in big, large placards, and he's worshipped like a hero. So that's in a small remote place like Kargil. So all the Islamist groups in India, they are very strongly supportive of Palestine, and now they're and lately, with the emerging influence of Turkey and Qatar, they're getting more and more interconnected with that. Now coming to the dissimilarities. Previously, the Hindu-Muslim relationship in India was not much impacted by what was happening in the West Asia. And even during the Mughal times, the Mughal kings never paid much importance to the caliph, sitting in West Asia. In fact, they were much more prosperous and much more richer. So they used to pay a lot of donation and a lot of grants to the Mecca and Medina. So the Mughal kings, they did not have much adoration for the caliph sitting in West Asia. But then, that resulted in kind of a slightly a good modus vivendi between the common Hindus and Muslims at the grassroots level. But that's something which is a history now. That's bygone, or that's the phenomenon of the bygone days. Nowadays, common Muslims in India, they're coming under the strong influence of the global Islamist movement. So Palestine is very dear to them. Now the dissimilarities. Currently, so in Israel, the population of the Islamists or the adversaries, they are on the border, so they can take sufficient actions. But in India, the battleground is present in each and every city, not just each and every city, but in each and every village. So if India faces anything, or threat coming from radicalization and terrorism in the future, internal threat, that will be very widespread and massive. And unfortunately, unlike the Israeli security setup and the diplomats and bureaucrats, our government people, our intelligence agencies, security setup, diplomats, they have a very poor understanding of this Islamist threat. So, and even in terms of capabilities, we are in a very bad shape, I must say.
Risha, you want to have any more thoughts?
I guess I do want to add a couple of things here that firstly, I think when the world order changed after the end of the Cold War, the drop of the Iron Curtain, Samuel Huntington wrote this book about the clash of civilizations, right? So I think there has been an over-domination of a lefto-Islamist movement, which basically has emerged after that. And that impact is being seen across the globe, so we are seeing ethnicities or groups, civilizational entities aligning together. And what I'm seeing really is that this lefto-Islamic movement is against, say, it's India, it's of course, Israel and the other democracies in the Western world. I mean, if when Nasrallah was killed, US was also criticized for it, right? So, so there is a sort of a polarization from that standpoint also. And secondly, we are seeing an impact on us in the United States as well as the diaspora. So this is left Islamic movement. I think it manifests itself pretty strongly here, even in academia and other places. And they have started introducing, certain curriculums which talk of the Jews as Zionists and the Hindus as the Hindutva movement, right? So they have added a lot of information on that front as well. So this is, I think it is a war on all fronts from that angle. It is, and it is the polarization from a civilizational point of view. And we are seeing those impacts.
Okay. Let me get one or two more before we move on to the next panel. One thing that has come up sort of in passing is what has happened in Bangladesh in the last couple of months. It has gotten very little attention what is happening outside the West. I mean, there was this kind of idea that, oh, the Hasina government is too authoritarian and these are the people revolting. If you look a little bit closer, it was very clear to me anyway that groups such as Jamaat-e-Islami, which has been discussed quite a bit here, were at the forefront of pushing her out. As you know, these groups have a significant presence in the US, and this has just not gotten discussed. What should the US and the West more broadly know, and what should India, its allies, and other people that just oppose radical Islamism do about the situation in Bangladesh? Anybody wants to take that?
Yeah, I'll just begin with one observation that may be helpful in looking at how we examine this problem. When the crisis in Bangladesh was unfolding, there were protests, of course, happening on the streets of America related to Israel. And what I immediately noticed is that the far left that has been a driving force in the anti-Israel protests in the United States, with organizations like the Party for Socialism and Liberation and the Communist Party of the United States, what they immediately did is they pivoted in their message early on, like before it even hit headline news and before there was an overthrow of the government. They pivoted immediately in messaging of support for the, quote, student protests in Bangladesh. So they framed the protest first as a student protest. And if people remember the Iranian Revolution, like that's how the revolution was also described in 1979. It was the far left, the socialists, who laid claim to overthrowing the corrupt Shah of Iran. And then soon enough, Ayatollah Khomeini, of course, was in power. And who did he decimate but them first? And I think Bangladesh is a really good window into how the far left work with the Islamists, because definitely the Islamists then emerged. They reared their ugly head, and they were the ones, of course, who are going to perpetuate the worst violence against the Hindus. And I thought that was what was really important for me to see in the propaganda messaging of the far left in the United States was that this was a global movement. That this is one thing that I really want to leave with folks, is that we're talking about South Asia right now. We talk about the United States. We talk about Israel. But in the leftist class struggle, like they want to lay claim, just like the Islamists do, to every country in the world. Like there are spheres of influence where they're trying to really have power right now. Bangladesh became one of them, to the shock of so many. And I would invite, the US officials who are analyzing this to really critically look at the entities that are part of that overthrow, so that they can see that the reality and the truth of the movement that was used to, bring political upheaval to the country, and then also lay claim to innocent lives.
Real quick, guys, we have just a couple more minutes left. Abhinav, Richa, you have things to add?
Yes, just on Bangladesh only. So, well, Bangladesh, in case of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina was the last thin line or a little, whatever you call it, a weak barrier between the Islamist takeover and the secularism. But now that's gone, and I see a very bleak future for Bangladesh. The reason is that Jamaat-e-Islami and Islamic Chhatra Shibir played a crucial role in this entire anti-Sheikh Hasina agitation. Definitely supported by the foreign deep state, and they were the stakeholders involved in that. But now their ties with Pakistan are getting very strong. So very soon, Pakistan will have a very strong footprint and presence in Bangladesh. And then we already have an example of what happened in Bangladesh in between 95 and 2001 when Begum Khalida Zia of the Bangladesh Nationalist Party was in power. So BNP was strongly backed. It has always been backed by Jamaat-e-Islami. And in those days, Bangladesh had become a hotbed of all the terrorists, who were coming from Pakistan. In fact, this fellow Masood Azhar, he infiltrated into India from Bangladesh. Sajjad Afghani came to India from Bangladesh. The entire IC-814 hijacking conspiracy was hatched, in Bangladesh. It was very majorly involved. So we have already seen what happened in Bangladesh when it was ruled by the Islamists. Now, this version of Islamist is much, much more intense and insidious than what it was in between 1995 and 2001. So I see a very bad future for Bangladesh and its minorities, and even worse for India, because India will have three fronts now, as I mentioned earlier: Pakistan, Bangladesh, and China. And as regards India, it must be clarified that it is a major victory for Pakistan and its deep state in Bangladesh. And it's kind of, I've written that they have more or less avenged the defeat of 1971. And regarding India, Bangladesh is a very far cry. They first need to take care of their own West Bengal, which is becoming a very extreme hotbed of Islamist radicals. Bangladesh is too distant. If they don't take care of West Bengal, then the strong nexus will be coming up between Bangladesh and West Bengal.
Risha, real quick, we have to wrap
Very
up.
quickly, yes. So, of the 57 Islamic nations, I think there are a handful of democratically elected leaders, and Sheikh Hasina was one of them. And the fact that the Western countries have been quiet about this, have silently allowed this to happen. And the newspapers here did not report it. The Hindu genocide that was started to happen, they did not report about that. They continued to talk about it as if it was a student protest, when actually it had much deeper, radical elements working in the backdrop. So the way it was reported for a long time, I think, was really bad. The fact that we have a home base in Canada and in US for some of the extremist elements who also are earlier Sheikh Hasina's government was trying to extradite them because they were involved in the murder of Mujibur Rahman. So these are some of the things that I think the West has to hold itself accountable also, because we are supposed to be those who protect democracy, and to allow what happened in Bangladesh to happen, I think some of it, the onus is on us as well.
And thank you very much for all of you guys coming and talking about these topics. Really appreciate your expertise, and thank you very much. We'll see you next time.